And hello, everyone, and welcome to the Pumpkin Copter cast. I am joined by my good friend slash former podcast haver, Bad Thoughts.
Hello, I
So,
am here.
so today is for adventure game enthusiasts. Today is a pretty good day because it's the annual anniversary of the day where Grim Fandango was released in HD so that people could actually buy it and not quote unquote acquire it through other means. Not that
Yeah,
anyone would ever do that.
yeah, I owned it for a long time, but I also had to acquire it through other means just to play it. But I still owned it, so I counted it as fair.
So, before we get started talking about the game Bad Thoughts, maybe you can tell my -7 listeners about yourself, the games that interest you, and how you came across Grim Fandango all those years ago.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, uh, when I was a kid, it was a matter of my mum's partner had a PC and I had the Super Nintendo, and I wasn't allowed into the room with the PC on it because they thought I would break it. But I was fascinated by all these like weird, posh looking games with 3D graphics that you would be playing, like Nocturne and Grim Fandango and things like that. So whenever he would leave the house, my mum would let me into the computer room to play things, and Grim Fandango was the one that I just latched onto as a kid because it just looked so interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I'd never seen anything like that before. And like having only played stuff like Super Nintendo up until then, it was probably the first game I played where the point of it wasn't that it was a game. It was more the point of it was more story and writing and ideas and just the pretty landscapes and everything. So that's like my history with Grim Fandango, and I became obsessed with it. I never finished it as a kid because I didn't understand it. I wasn't very good at the puzzles, but I went back to it a long time later, and having it in my head that it was my favorite game of all time, and I played through it, and that completely confirmed it. And then I continued playing through it, and I used to play it at least like 4 or 5 times a year. Um, it's sort of tapered off a bit now, just because I played so many other things. But yeah, it's always a great comfort blanket to me.
Mm.
And I guess for other games I'm interested, I mean, I've just bought Monster Hunter, and like once
Oh,
I finish this, I will be going to play more Monster Hunter, and I will probably be playing that for months and months. So I think I lost something like 600 hours to Monster Hunter 4.
goodness.
Yeah, I think that's eaten up even more time than Grim Fandango has. I think I'm very eclectic in my gaming tastes in general. I've always had a big soft spot for adventure games, um, but I'm kind of all over the place. I always have been, to be honest.
Well, my experience with Grim Fandango didn't start until much later on because I was a primary. My brother had all the latest Nintendo systems, so I was raised in a primarily Nintendo household, and it wasn't until years later when I acquired my own computer and like was able to and had a job and was able to buy games regularly that I realized that like what point and click adventure games were. And I don't know, Grim Fandango when the when the remaster was announced way back when, that
Yeah.
was, I've heard there was quite a buzz on the internet as people kept singing its praises. And
Mm.
like a year-ish later when they released it on Max, I was able to find out why, and I'm now in complete agreement.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. Although I did notice when the remaster came out, I bought it straight away, and it was weird having played through it a lot, because there was a way to play it before that. There was a sort of emulator called Scum VM
Mm-hmm.
that could emulate the specific engine that Double Fine built for their games, and it was really the only way you could possibly play Grim Fandango and Full Throttle and Day of the Tentacle and things like that until they remastered them all. And it was weird starting it, and they'd updated the controls to make them much better
Mm-hmm.
and much more like user friendly. And I can't play them with those user friendly controls. I had to switch them to the terrible old controls. I remember talking to Piano Slave from the
Yes.
Turbo. I remember talking to her when the game came out, and she was so offended that I had switched back to the original controls. It just seemed like the stupidest thing you could possibly do. It's just like, even with the remaster, I still go back to the old ways. This makes very little sense, but never mind.
All that muscle memory.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I can't control it otherwise. It's weird.
Yeah.
It's the way.
So, in case the -7 people who watch this show whenever I decide to try and put something out don't know what Grim Fandango is, in which case, shame on you. Let's just talk a bit about the premise, because talking about the ridiculous premises of video games with a straight face is one of the small joys of life.
Indeed, it is. Yeah. Joy, do you want me to have a go at it,
Uh,
or would you like to?
I'll probably end up giving it a description that doesn't do it justice, but why not? So, in Grim Fandango, you play the local deadman, Manuel Manny Calavera, who works in the Department of Death, because it's not just straight, because in Grim Fandango world, it's not just a straight shoot from dying to going on to the hereafter. He's a travel agent of sorts, and that depending on how good and or bad you were in life, you get the terrible or the best travel package to the ninth underworld ever, and that's pretty much it. I'm not saying anything else, because just buy it and play it and be engrossed in it as I was.
Yeah, I think the less you know, the better. To be honest, although there are elements of it that it's hard not to speak about because they're so defining. And it's hard not to spoil it in a way because there's so much of the joy is in the writing and the storytelling.
Yeah.
And yeah, but that's a nice concise summary, I think.
And one of the reasons I've, like, in addition to the game itself, which is great, and and pretty much all the Double Fines remastered, they include like all commentaries that give behind the scenes looks as to what the game was like during development. And as someone who regularly listens to the commentaries on all the Homestar Runner DVDs, I just eat that stuff up like candy.
Nice. Yeah. It's certainly a cool feature. I don't recall many people doing that. Commentaries on games. I can imagine it being incredibly helpful for people who are interested in designing them, certainly.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a cool idea.
So, since you're quite a bit more experienced with Grim Fandango than I am, without giving away too much, why do you think it's become such a go-to example of how to make a great adventure game?
Right. I mean, the very like first thing is the look. I think this instantly unique and recognizable, and I can't think of much else that looks like that. Even though I know the entire look is essentially ripped off of sort of Aztec culture and Aztec architecture, it's still like as you look at that game and it's like I can't think of anything else in my mind. So that's like the first thing, just the sheer uniqueness of the design. It just jumps out at you, and it's very impressive and ironically full of life. And then it's interesting that I played it again quite recently, and it just struck me how all the puzzles are kind of used to enhance the story in a way.
Really?
There's nothing that's like there are puzzles that are annoying. I mean, it's not like an absolutely perfect game. Some puzzles are sort of twisty and turny and require some really weird logic that doesn't make much sense, really. However, most of the puzzles ultimately go some way to developing characters or moving the story along. They're not just like stopgaps in between the plot.
Mm-hmm.
There's not like, do this puzzle and get to this next room and then something else will happen. It's always like, do this puzzle, and within this puzzle, something will be happening as you're doing it. And it's just like it's got a beautiful sort of flow of storytelling that isn't stunted by the puzzles ever, apart from the ones that are a bit irritating, like the one where you've got to push a wheelbarrow to make the thing shake so it'll swing Glottis around. That's really irritating puzzle, and I hate it.
Oh, I remember that.
Yeah, but other than that, it's a perfect game. And also, just again going back to like the sheer quality of writing.
Mm-hmm.
I think I don't. Right. There's so many. There's so many lines that are just thrown away. Every single, like, even just the little description lines are incredibly funny and smart and well thought out. They've put effort into every single little detail. So it's like you can look at things that you don't actually. Oops, yeah. Sorry, my mic.
Yep.
Oh, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry. My microphone's going all crackers.
Yeah.
Give me a sec.
Yep. Technical difficulties. I'm professional, I swear.
I believe you. Okay. Sorry, where was I? Yeah, the writing. I think in terms of everything is well thought out, everything has been thought about. They've put effort into every tiny little detail. Just things that you don't even need or you don't use. Like there's in the opening, this isn't too big a spoiler because it's one of the very first things you'll interact with in the game. But there's just a set of books on Manny's desk, and he's got a really good little throwaway line. It's just something like, these are books my boss gave me to help me sell. They bought the farm, now selling the cows, stuff like that. And that never really comes into play. Those books aren't important in any way, but it's just brilliantly written line, and every single item you can interact with, he has one of those, even if you never use them. And it's just the level of detail they put into the script, I think, is really special and really makes it as a game.
Yeah, I
I
agree.
think.
I was very impressed by the sheer level of detail in the game and how every single screen or location feels distinct, even in like the starting
Mm.
area where if you're like me, just walking up and down, going up and down the building constantly because you're lost because you're garbage at adventure games.
Oh, same. Believe me, the only reason I'm any good at that game is because I've played it to death.
Yeah.
So it's the same with Full Throttle. I've never been very good at adventure games. I can just, if I just play them enough so I've memorized them, and then it's practically cheating anyway.
And one of my favorite like game mechanical things was I think Tim Schafer and them mentioned it in a commentary or an announcement trailer or something.
Mm.
Was how in the game when most adventure games there's like a cursor mouse or something, but instead in Grim Fandango, Manny just turns his head
Yeah.
to anything you can interact with or something that's potentially interesting, and I thought that was a great way to draw you in and not be like distracted by a weird shaped cursor.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very cool. It's interesting how they managed to work out how to do it so it's subtle enough that it's not distracting, like his head's not spinning around ridiculously. But it's also like he moves. They've got like a good speed on it, so you always can tell when he's looking at something and that there is a point of interest there. But
Yeah.
it's not like off-putting at the same point, because that's a hard balance to hit. I couldn't imagine I could hit that to be honest. So even like the tiny little minutia of it is like it feels like really well programmed.
Yeah. So even though I said we'd try not to, I feel like you can't talk about games that like this without spoiling
We
some
can
of it.
put
So
spoilers after
spoiler
this.
spoilers incoming. So with that particular warning put on, I wanna ask what's your favorite part of the game, and why do you think it stuck with you like years after you stopped playing it for the first time?
I really think all of year two, where he's the casino manager, is like just an example of everything I love. Like when I was a kid, I was raised on old black and white movies like Casablanca
Mm-hmm.
and things like that, and to have a game that is like just Grim Fandango just openly references Casablanca throughout the whole of the second year and a bunch of other movies. And it's also like it's like its own contained story. Like you could just release year two as a game, like a £5 hour long little section, and that would be like a pitch perfect like game in and of itself. It's really, really good. The writing is best in the second year as well. I think it's all a matter of there's poetry in it, which is interesting. Like there's a poetry club, but there's also little throwaway poems. Like there's one of my favorite moments in the entire game is where Manny can go down to the pier and talk to the old sea captain, and if you stare at the moon and you examine it, then Manny and the captain will recite a poem together. I think I can say it goes like it shone pale as bone as I stood there alone, And I thought to myself how the moon that night cast its light on my heart's true delight, and the reef where her body was strewn. And it's just like every single time that gets me. It's like I almost tear up over how good that is and how like just a beautiful little bit of poetry that is. That's like straight out of the Romantic periods. That could be a William Blake poem or something.
Hmm.
It's really special. That whole year is just an example of like it's where the puzzles are the best. It's where the writing's the best. It's where the characters are really good. There's this whole array of fascinating characters. There's a lot of tragedy. It's really, it's like, it's almost like after that, once you get to like year 3 and 4, as good as they are, and I love them to pieces, it's always like year 2 that I will remember, and it always sticks in my head as the most special part of that game, and the thing that makes it my favorite game.
Yeah. Year 2 surprised me just because when I first bought it and started playing it, I knew next to nothing about it, and I didn't know, just because I didn't know that the game takes place over 4 years, and yeah, I like the fact that they use time skips fairly well to make it feel like it's just a huge journey from Manny to get from where he starts to the very end of the game, and
Yeah, and
even
then you get to meet all these characters that Manny has met over the year, and you get to like it doesn't like waste much time with exposition and explaining who they are. It's just like Manny knows them, and he's got very like good rapport with them, and it's just really well. They're all really well introduced and well developed before they even come on screen, so it doesn't even matter, and they can just jump in and be part of the story and then be gone. It's really impressive how they do that.
yeah, and my favorite sad part of it is, I think, also in year 2 was when Manny first starts to find out that something really sketchy is afoot in the underworld, is when he finds Lola, who's already been, quote, sprouted.
Yeah,
And it's, I don't know. In stories in which it takes place in a place where everyone's already dead, I'm thinking, like, how can. But Manny's dead. What can honestly happen? And I'm like, oh,
yeah. You could have something worse than death.
I guess so.
Well, that's the implication anyway. It's really the description of sprouting is terrifying because the idea that they're still conscious. Anyway, that's getting like quite deep into the sort of lore of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's devastating. It's really heartbreaking. It's really well done, and I really like the guy who works in the sort of the dead version of the morgue with all the people who have been sprouted, and he's just looking after them.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
He's really cool, and I just there's a moment where you have to go and speak to him, and then just as you're leaving, he'll just say to himself, so he'll say, "We may have years, we may have hours, but sooner or later we push up flowers."
Oh, yeah, that's the first line of the game that I ever heard referenced ever, and that was years before
Yeah,
the,
it's
the remastered was announced.
it's a very strong line. It kind of sums up the game quite well.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, man. Um,
Go ahead.
what would you say is your favorite part of the game in general? Do you have a single specific part or a single specific year or anything?
Let's see. Um, well, even though I love all of the game, my least favorite part is the very opening-y bits of year 3, just because that one that one puzzle where you have to use the boat, and it took me like so long to figure it out, and I was like, how would anyone know that? And I wanted to break something.
Yeah, that's fair. That's very fair. I'm pretty. I don't think there is no shame in resorting to a walkthrough for certain parts of the game necessarily, because some of it is very counterintuitive. That's literally the same with every adventure game I've ever played, though, I guess, to be
Yeah,
fair. I can't think of one I haven't at least looked something up. Maybe I think Broken Age I did, like, just by itself. That was the only one I ever managed to do without a walkthrough.
but my favorite, I don't know, it's been like a year and a half-ish, 2 years since I've played it, and I've only played it the one time so far. But I don't know, my favorite part is when Manny first finds Mercedes and, cuts her out of the body bag, and she kind of knowingly says, they couldn't save me, could they? And he's like, no, but there's still a chance that you could save me. And that's probably one of my favorite single lines in the game.
That is awesome. I I really like going to the land of the living. Just the look of that was terrifying. I remember sitting there playing it with my little sister watching me, and she just burst into tears because she was terrified.
It reminded me of Nickelodeon in the 90s whenever they had like that big Nickelodeon Splat logo and they kept using like random eyeballs and mouths to like
Yeah,
make up the face.
it always made me think of Angela Anaconda. I don't know if that's something anybody remembers, but yeah, it's a very strange. But yeah, at least there's some great moments.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what is your least favorite part of the game? Since I told you
Uh,
mine.
that wheelbarrow puzzle I mentioned earlier.
Uh,
I hate it. Really. I think that's the point where I got so stuck as a kid and I got so frustrated that I stopped, and I think my mum did it for me and I got to carry on for a little while. But yeah, it's one that even now, like, it's the only one that I can't do just from memory. I don't know
yeah.
why. It just, for some reason, it just messes with my head. And it really, yeah, it really bugs me. And that's literally like the only thing I can think of that I really don't like in the game. It's like everything else is like, even the most irritating puzzles have redeeming factors about them. They have like something amusing, a funny scene, or some good dialogue related to them. So that all that one has is like Glottis being thrown off a big tower, and it's just like, it's not worth it for that gag. I'm all right. I'll just skip it, please.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, that's genuinely all I can think of negative about the game.
Mm.
Yeah, although the ship one you brought up is a good example.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's very fair thinking about it. I was looking through some screenshots today. I was just trying to sort of refreshing myself, and it was like every single thing. If you just every time the camera changes and you get a different scene, it's like you could take that picture, you could just take that as an image and hang it in an art gallery, and it would be fine there, in my opinion. It's really like, apart from the forest is the only place that's not particularly visually interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Everywhere else is like its own like piece of art, and it's just intricately designed down to the tiniest detail. It's very nice.
Yeah. Um, hmm. Yeah, trying to think of something else.
Okay.
Do you think? Oh, I know adventure games, or at least I've noticed lately, they've been getting a bit of a resurgence. Do you think this is a bit of an obvious question, but do you think Grim Fandango played a bit of a role in giving adventure games a much needed boost when they announced its remastering?
I think I think I think the main thing that gave adventure games a huge boost was the original Kickstarter for Double Fine that ended up being Broken Age.
Yeah,
Because I remember that being a thing, and I backed it as well myself, and it was like we want to do an adventure game like the adventure games that we used to make. We want to do one like Grim Fandango or like Full Throttle, and that came like a little bit before the remaster. I think it became before all of the remasters. I'm pretty sure, apart from maybe Monkey Island was remastered first, and then they announced the Kickstarter, and then Full Throttle, and then Grim Fandango, and things. So I think just the huge reaction that got on Kickstarter, it made so much money, and
right.
it just really like catapulted the idea that um, adventure games are something people still want, and because of that, the Double Fine just felt like they had like the confidence to go ahead and re-release Grim Fandango, and I think just like the huge acclaim, like I know like it's got, I know it's like all a bit aged now in terms of the controls, and they did what they can to update it. And I remember reading reviews at the time saying like it's still like an amazing game, even though it's aged quite poorly in terms of just the very basic technical issues. But yeah, just the level of acclaim it got when it came out, in terms of like it still being incredibly written and beautiful to look at, sort of gave people a boost and actually made people check out this game that you weren't able to play before and had kind of become the stuff of legend because you had to own a computer from before 2001 if you wanted to play it, or get an illegal copy and find a quite complicated emulator that was quite irritating to use in order to play it. So yeah, I think it contributed. I don't think it was like a major catalyst necessarily, but it is important, and it's important in the history of point and clicks. And I'm just really glad people got to play it. To be honest, so even if it didn't, like, even if nobody ever made another adventure game again after Grim Fandango, the idea that people get to play Grim Fandango now is really like it warms my heart. Yeah, I think that's it.
Yep, I remember the first time when I finished the game and I looked at how long I played it, and because I'm garbage at adventure games, I clocked in at about 20 hours, and even
Yeah,
then it felt like a lot longer, and not because it felt padded, but just because, I don't know, everything just drew me into it, and felt like I was watching one of those really long mini series that just
yeah,
put so much detail into such a short amount of time.
yeah. You just watched 6 seasons of Game of Thrones in 20 hours. Yeah, it's really cool. It's that's it's impressive how it does that. I had something in my head to say there, and now it's gone, so I apologize.
No, it's fine. And let's see. yeah, I think that brings us to the conclusion of this little look back and retrospective on Grim Fandango.
Yeah,
And
a 30-minute long gushing session.
yeah, I mean, if any game
It
deserves
deserves it.
it, yeah.
Yeah,
So
indeed.
thank you very much to anyone and everyone who's listening to this. If you enjoyed the Pumpkin Copter cast, please like, subscribe, comment, blah blah blah. It really helps me out on the occasions I post anything actually interesting. You can follow me on the Twitters at tgorman83, and I'd like to thank my good friend Bad Thoughts for joining me. And is there anything you want to plug before we sign off?
Oh, not massively. If you like, you can subscribe to my channel on YouTube because uh, I am working on some stuff. It's Bad Thoughts 90, by the way.
Oh,
I'm working on a video about Zelda Breath of the Wild at the moment, which is very topical and very important and definitely on everyone's mind and isn't a year too late. But I think it's going to be an interesting take on it. It's going to be about Zelda and sort of LGBT representation, specifically in Breath of the Wild.
mm-hmm. Was,
And it's going to be positive. I'm not slagging it off.
yeah, I remember it was quite like, LGBT themes and all that was quite a topic when Breath of the Wild like first came onto the scene.
Yeah, yeah. There was some very interesting stuff to say, and I've got a very very personal experience to talk about with it. But that's going to be a while away. So if you want to subscribe, feel free. But there's nothing there at the moment anyway. And also, thank you so much for having me on, Tigo. This was a lot of fun.
You're welcome, and thank you for joining me. And hopefully, the next time we have a game we can mutually gush over, we can do this again.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely.
So, once again, thank you for listening to the Pumpkin Copter Cast, a good old podcast about video games, and we will see you next time.
Bye.